Hey guys, welcome to Science! Today we are going to talk a little bit more about plant adaptations and how plants use these adaptations to help them survive in their environment. So we're going to start off and we're going to watch a really cool video about some neat plants and some adaptations. And anytime you're thinking of adaptations, you're thinking, how does this maybe it's part of a plant, maybe it's something a plant does. How does it help it survive and live and grow? Okay, so we're going to look at that today. We're going to watch this super fun video. For your exit slip today, you are going to have to tell me one plant and one adaptation that it has. So maybe take some notes of a cool plant that you like on this video that you're watching, and an adaptation that helps it survive in its environment. All right, so here we go. We're going to start out with this plant adaptation video.
Mia, aloha. What's new in Hawaii?
Hawaii is amazing. There's so much to do. I went snorkeling today, and you should see all the different plants and flowers. Look.
Oh, that would make a great painting.
I'm sending you tons of pics, Sam. I swear, plants can grow anywhere here. The beach, the rainforest, the mountains, even underwater. I don't know how they do it.
You'd be surprised how well plants can adapt to different environments so that they can survive.
Plants know how to adapt? What do you mean?
Well, okay. When you went snorkeling, you had to put a mask on and breathe through a tube, right?
Yeah? How else would I be able to breathe underwater?
Right. When you put on the snorkeling equipment, you were adapting so you could survive underwater. The mask and breathing tube were adaptations. Plants adapt kind of like we do. An adaptation is a change a living thing makes in order to fit into its environment. For us, it's easy. We can adapt in a snap, just like you did when you went snorkeling. But it takes a little longer in nature. Plants learn to adapt over time.
Well, the plants I've seen must have done some serious adapting. Look at the ones I saw underwater.
Underwater plants like those adapted their leaves and stems to be flexible, so they can bend and flow with the water.
And look.
That's kind of cool. If you think about seaweed, right? The water's flowing. Think if there's lots of waves moving. If it had a very stiff stem, it would break easily. So it's flexible, so it could move around in the water. Pretty neat. Ooh, coconuts. This one should be interesting.
This coconut was floating. Isn't that cool?
The coconut is actually a seed. By floating, the seeds, or coconuts, can move around instead of just sinking down to the ocean floor.
And this water lily was floating all by itself. How does that work?
Water lilies and other plants that float have air spaces in their stems. This adaptation helps them stay afloat.
That plant floats better than I do.
Looks like it. Hey, let's see the pics you took of the rainforest.
Oh, yeah. Look at these flowers. They were so bright and colorful, but they grew super close to the ground.
That's another adaptation. Bright colors and the low location attract birds and insects that help pollinate the flowers. That's important, since there's almost no wind at the rainforest floor to carry pollen away.
I never would have thought of that. What about these? They're so pretty, but the guide said they were poisonous.
Well, some plants need to protect themselves from animals or bugs that might eat them. That's probably what the poison was for.
Wow.
Oh, that's pretty cool. A poisonous flower. So that's an adaptation it has. It's like, don't eat me, I'm poisonous. That's a really good one. I like it.
These adaptations are so smart.
Adaptations are smart, and they're necessary for survival.
What about these? The leaves were huge and super slippery. Is that an adaptation?
It definitely is. It gets pretty dark on the rainforest floor, so those huge leaves make it easy to catch as much sunlight as they can. They're super slippery, so the extra rainwater slides right off.
Seems like plants can adapt to almost anything to survive.
Plants need water and sunlight to survive, but their adaptations certainly make it easier for them to live in tough places like the rainforest, underwater, or even in super hot or cold places like the desert or the tundra. If plants didn't adapt, they wouldn't be able to survive.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I am certainly adapting to the Hawaiian lifestyle.
All right, so maybe you found a plant there that you might want to write about for your exit slip. we're going to look at this super fun mystery science. I love mystery science, it's my favorite. And it's going to talk about a couple of different plants that you might want to use, some pretty cool ones to learn about. So, should you water a cactus? We're not going to do this whole thing, but we're going to watch a little bit of it. It's really cool, one of my favorite mysteries that we do.
In the last mystery, we solved the question, why do trees grow so tall? We saw how trees are competing for light, and so have most of their leaves at the top of the canopy. The canopy is like a roof of leaves at the top of the forest. But we also saw how the canopy creates shade down on the forest floor, a huge zone of darkness. Because of this, you might think that we won't have any plants growing down in the darkness. Look closely though. There are plants that grow on the forest floor. Like this. It's not a tree at all, but a small plant called an orchid growing on the forest floor in South America. There's hardly any light down here, so I thought I could help the poor thing out. I brought some orchids home and put them in direct sunlight, right beside a big window. That should help, right? 2 weeks later, and now, the leaves have turned yellow and the orchids are dying. What happened? Why are the orchids not doing well anymore?
All right, so think about that. Why are the orchids not doing well? Look at their yellow leaves. What do you think is happening?
Orchids are a type of flowering plant that needs very little sunlight, less than other plants. They don't need nearly as much light as trees, so they're all right growing in the shade of the forest floor. In fact, they're more than all right. The forest floor is the perfect place for them because it's nice and dim down there under the canopy. And as you've now learned, orchids will eventually die if given too much light. Maybe you'd heard of orchids before. There are so many different kinds of orchids, 30,000 different kinds. That's more different kinds of orchids than there are different kinds of birds in the world. You can usually tell an orchid from other flowers because orchids have really eye-catching flowers with big petals like this. They almost look like the wings of a flying animal or the sails on a sailboat. This one's called a moth orchid. It has big, bright, purple-pink petals. Or check this one out. It's one of the stranger-looking orchids. It's called the flying duck orchid. Can you see why it's called that? The shape of its petals really does make it look like a duck. See, here's the beak, here's the head, here's its wings. This thing is so strange. There's even one kind of orchid that we eat. Not the flower, like you see here, but the seed pod of this orchid. And the seed pods look like this. These seed pods have a liquid that we squeeze out and use for flavoring. They're the seed pods of the vanilla orchid. So that's where vanilla flavor comes from. Orchids aren't the only plant that needs little sunlight. If we keep looking around in dim places, you can find other ones. Look at this forest floor. What do you see? It's covered with ferns. Ferns tend to like lots of water, but they don't like lots of sunlight. So you'll see them in shaded, wet places in the forest. You can always tell a fern by its leaves. They look a little bit like feathers. So orchids and ferns are just two examples of what we call shade-loving plants, since they don't need lots of sunlight. If you go to a plant store, they usually have a whole section where you can buy shade-loving plants. And that's because these are great plants to keep indoors. Think about it. They're perfectly happy in the shade. They actually need little sunlight. When you get home today, look around your house. See if you can find any shade-loving plants. And you can keep an eye out for them in your yard too. There's often shade-loving plants there. Or at the dentist's office. Do you see one? There it is. Really, any kind of waiting room, you can look for them. There's one, and there's one. See what shade-loving plants of the forest floor you can find in your life. So, not all plants need the same amount of light. It's helpful to stop and collect our thoughts. We know that all plants need sunlight, and all plants need water. Some plants need lots of sunlight, so I'll use this sun symbol to mean lots of sunlight. And as we just learned, other plants need only little sunlight, so I'll use a smaller sun symbol here to mean little sunlight. But let's also think about how much water different plants need. The big raindrop symbol will mean lots of water, and the smaller raindrop symbol will mean a little water. If you think about it then, there are 4 categories or boxes that we could put plants into in terms of what they need. Now, most plants are up in this category. They need lots of sunlight and lots of water. These are the plants we've learned about in earlier mysteries, like grass. Remember your grass head? Almost all trees, and most flowers too. They need lots of sunlight and lots of water. But now today you just learned about plants that need plenty of water, but only a little sunlight. Orchids are examples of plants that want little sunlight but plenty of water. And ferns too, and all other plants that you can find that people keep in their houses. What about this box over here? Now, this might surprise you, but over in this category, there are almost no plants that want little sunlight and little water. So I'm actually going to put an X to this box. But now we have an empty square, this one up here. This would be a place to list plants that need lots of sunlight, but little water. So plants that are kind of like the opposite of orchids and ferns. Can you think of a plant that would go here? Are there any plants that do well with little water but lots of sunlight?
Ooh, little water, but lots and lots of sun. I bet you're thinking of one based off what the title of this mystery is called. So let's see. Let's look at this plant that needs lots and lots of sunlight, but a little water.
A place on Earth where there's almost no water, almost no rain, and yet lots of sunlight? It's the desert. Now, it's not that the desert gets zero rainfall. It's just that in the desert, it doesn't rain that often, sometimes just a couple of times per year. That's what makes deserts so dry. Any plants living in the desert have to have ways of collecting and storing as much of the rainfall as possible, since it hardly ever rains. Here's a very famous example of a desert plant. It's a cactus. There are actually lots of different kinds of cactuses. They're all very good at collecting water. The cactus you see here is the second tallest kind of cactus in the world. It's a kind called the saguaro cactus, and it's located in Arizona, USA. The winner of the tallest cactus goes to the saguaro's close cousin, the elephant cactus of northern Mexico. You can see from this picture how it compares in size to a small truck. Now, if you've never had the chance to see a cactus up close, it's definitely something to put on your list. They're so strange and so cool to see. All desert cactuses have huge, painful spines that are as sharp as needles. Whenever you see a cactus, notice also how big around they are. Cactuses are basically just big, thick stems because they're storing all that water inside of them. Now, here's an experiment we can try. Since cactuses are so good at storing water, what would happen if you watered one every day? I went ahead and tried it. I bought a cactus at the store. I went home and I watered this cactus every day instead of once every few weeks or months like what would happen in the desert. What do you think will happen to my cactus if I water it every day?
What do you guys think is going to happen? Let me tell you what, I have overwatered a house cactus before and some houseplants, and it's not pretty. So what do you think? If you were going to just keep watering that cactus every day, would it do well? Let's look.
This was my cactus, which I watered every day. At first, things seemed fine, but I watered it day after day after day, and then things got worse. See what happens? The cactus actually burst open. It turns out cactuses will die if you give them water every day. This is true for not just cactuses, but other desert plants as well. Cactuses are the main desert plants found in North and South America. In deserts on other continents, like Africa, they don't have cactuses. They have different plants, like this one. It looks kind of like a cactus. It's thick, and it's got spines on it. This plant from the deserts of Africa is called aloe. See those thick leaves? That's where it stores its water. When you hear that desert plants store water inside of them, it's tempting to think of it like a water bottle or maybe like a water tower. If you cut one open, you'd maybe find a pool of water in there. But let me show you. If we cut one open, we see that they're wet and juicy on the inside. It's more like a slimy, wet gel. So this is how desert plants store their water, as this slimy material, not as a pool of water. The slimy, wet gel that's inside of aloe, it's special. You might actually have rubbed some of it on your skin before, because we sell it and use it as a type of medicine. It helps with the pain you get from a burn. If you ever get a burn, It feels like a relief to rub some aloe gel on there. It's very soothing. There's a chance you have a bottle of aloe gel at home. Ask your parents. Since we're talking about desert plants other than cactuses, I have to show you one of the weirdest. It lives in a small patch of desert on the island of Madagascar, off the coast of Africa. Unlike all the other ones, it's a tree. It's called the baobab tree. And just looking at it, you can tell what it has in common with other desert plants. Because the rain doesn't fall very often, the baobab stores its water in its trunk. See? Here are more baobab trees. An even clearer example. I told you these were weird looking. So, like most plants, desert plants need lots of sunlight. But unlike most plants, desert plants only need little water. To solve our mystery for today, should you water a cactus? Yes, cactuses and other desert plants need water, but not as much water as most other plants. The bigger idea to understand from today's mystery is that even though all plants need sunlight and water, they don't all need them in the same amounts. To find out what a plant needs, look at where it lives in the wild. Some plants, like orchids and ferns, actually do better with less light than other plants, and so you find them growing in shaded areas in the wild. And some plants, like cactuses and aloe, actually do better with less water than other plants, and so you find them in dry places, like the desert.
All right, guys. So that was pretty cool. Looking at different environments that a plant could live in, and the different structures it might have in place in order for it to survive. So one thing that I could say is that a cactus has really, really thick trunk or really thick stem, and the thickness of it helps it store lots of water, which helps it survive in its environment. So think of a plant. It could be the orchid, it could be a cactus, it could be one from the Study Jams video. Think of a plant, and you're going to write that for your exit slip. You're going to pick one plant and one thing about it that helps it to survive in its environment. And you're going to write in complete sentences and answer that question for your teacher. All right, guys, I hope you learned a little bit of something today. I will see you guys next time. Have a great day.